Welcome to Sit Down Comedy Club TV. G'day, I'm Harley Breen, and I'm at the Sit Down Comedy Club, about to do my show, Not Quite Right. Look, a series of mistakes, I'd imagine. I wasn't very good at anything else, and I stumbled upon this. In fact, it was this very club that gave me my first gig. I was desperately trying to get into the acting world, and I'd auditioned for some really big schools around the country, some acting schools, and they'd recommended that I go and get some experience, which seems even now to make no fucking sense. That's what an acting school's for. So I was like, okay, I'll get some acting experience, and then I didn't really know how to go about that, and then I got so desperate, I was looking up theatre restaurants in the Yellow Pages, and in the same section of the Yellow Pages was the Sit Down Comedy Club, and so I called them up and asked for a gig, and did a gig back in 2000, and then didn't stop. I don't know. Being able to constantly shirk responsibility. I don't know that there's a good part. I mean, it's sort of just an unavoidable who I am. I was like, I feel the desire to tell a story and to entertain a crowd. I've always said that I don't think comedians are the funniest people in society. In fact, the funniest people in my life are not entertainers, and probably couldn't be entertainers. The difference is between, say, everybody else and stand-ups is that everyone has a great story to tell. We're just the ones that choose to do it on stage for money. Essentially, you try and not have that happen as quick as possible in your career, and it's kind of what shapes you. But I haven't had any recent proper bombs, so I have to cast my eye back to one that always rings true for me as the biggest bomb of my career. It was my sister's wedding. She'd asked me maybe 6 months into my career to MC her wedding, and that was a mistake, I think, for everyone involved. And long story short, I just couldn't buy a laugh. Like, I wouldn't have been able to pay someone to laugh. In fact, at one point, I did a joke that got a little chuckle from one of my cousins, and another one of my cousins bumped her and went, "Don't, you'll just encourage him." And then I had an ending planned to this whole event for my sister, which I, after an absolute disaster of a gig, decided to continue with the plan, which was me doing a lip sync to Ben Harper's version of Sexual Healing. Because my sister was a virgin when she was married, so I thought that would be funny. I put on an afro. I did pull short of blackface. And then for no apparent reason, my older brother came out in drag as my backup singer, not even necessary, and we got off stage in this absolutely hostile room of people who already hated me. And my older brother started gyrating and dry humping our new brother-in-law, and I started sexily singing right to my sister. So I'd challenge anyone to beat that for a bad gig. I have a lot of favourite comedians. I think there's a current pool of comics in this country who are really producing great and original stuff. Mel Buttle, who's opening for me tonight, is absolutely wonderful. Nick Cody, Luke McGregor, of course, the great Ronnie Chang has left our shores now. They're all great. I could list Reese Nicholson is fantastic. Celia Piccola is amazing. Geraldine Hickey is incredible. Blah, blah, blah. We could list off a lot of locals, and I think the current pool of comics are brilliant. Tom Gleason's at the top of his game at the moment, just absolutely killing it. But if I have to go back to somebody who I truly looked to and continue to look to as an inspiration for me, is Billy Connolly, who I think is... I just think he's the best storyteller comic that has ever been. The highlight of my career, I don't think I've had it. There's this saying that you're only as good as your last gig, and I've always refuted that. You're only as good as your next gig. The last gig is done. So whatever I can do I don't mind casting my eye back to a bad gig, but the idea that I would try and bring up a great experience seems weird because I think they're all ahead of me. You would hope that they are all ahead of me. That said, I've had some wonderful experiences, and one of those was this year completing my first TV show that was my show. And it's called Taboo. It wasn't my idea, unfortunately. It's the only thing I don't like about the idea. It's from Belgium, but it was, very much the brand is kind of hung around my neck, so to speak, and it was a great challenge as a stand-up to write comedy about subjects like terminal illness and mental illness and racism and physical disability. And I thoroughly enjoyed the entire process and all of the crew and all of the participants that were involved. I'd say that's a highlight at this point. It's an interesting question, how has comedy changed? Because there's a lot of discussion about that comedy has changed of late, and I don't think comedy has changed at all in one tiny moment. I think comedy has stayed the same. Society has changed. Humanity has changed. Comedy, it is just the job of the comic, of the comedian to go and experience life, witness it, write it down, and then perform it in the way that they choose and that they see fit for the audience. And said far more eloquently by my great friend David Quirk, who I should have mentioned before as one of my favourite comics, because he's a brand new show that's going to come out next year, and I hope it blows everyone's mind like it did mine just last week. He has this beautiful line where he says, "I'm not really a comedian, I just participate in life and report back." And that's all we do. So I don't think comedy has changed at all. I just think society has shifted, and it's our job to shift with it and keep reporting on it. Get out. It's so bad. Bad. Look, just tell your story is the advice I give it to anyone who ever wants to start in this. Tell your story. Every joke's been written. There's no new airline food joke, but there's definitely a new your experience with airline food. So if it's your story, then no one can argue it because you experienced it and you lived it. So just tell your truth, and that doesn't mean you have to be a storyteller. You can still be a joke writer. You can still be an absurd comic or whatever it is. But as long as it's you, as long as it's true to who you are, that's the best way to be, because then there's one version of it, and that's you. I don't know. I kind of quite like what I do in terms of being predominantly focused on being a storyteller. So I just keep trying to mine my life for stories. But then, of course, you run the risk of getting bored and getting tired. And there's a couple of ideas that I've got that are more television focused. One of those is a narrative comedy, situational comedy, sitcom, that I'm trying to work up. And look, if the powers that be in this country, I think that's a good idea. Maybe some of you will see that. Hey, thanks very much for having me. If you want to see more of me, I've got a couple of podcasts. One is kind of parenting focused called Shitting with the Door Open, and the other one is very much drink focused, and that is called That's the Drink Talking. Otherwise, you can find me on Instagram and Facebook. Harley Breen is the way to find it on both of those. Cheers.